Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. Housing in New York City. Here's some of the not so good news. New York City continues to face a severe shortage, indeed a crisis of affordable housing. Some of the numbers. 1 of 4 New York City renter households, 500,000 of them, spend more than half their income for rent. 500,000 households are doubled up, and 200,000 plus housing units are quote-unquote severely crowded. Record numbers of New Yorkers. About half of them children sleep in homeless shelters each night. And finally, there's an 8-year waiting list for New York City public housing and nearly 220,000 seniors on waiting lists for about 17,000 units of subsidized senior housing. Joining me today to talk about housing, city housing policy, and the agencies that build and finance housing in New York City is Youssouf, president of the New York City Housing Development Corporation. Ms. Youssouf was appointed by Mayor Bloomberg in November 2003. She has had substantial experience in finance, holding senior positions at Credit Suisse First Boston, Daiwa Securities, Prudential Securities, and Merrill Lynch. Welcome to City Talk.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's look at some good news, though. On January 29th, the New York Times headlined, "Where Crack Once Ruled, Construction Now Booms." Daily News headline says, "Bill Booms Put New Life into Old Hoods." From East New York to the South Bronx, from Red Hook to the Rockaways, we're building housing. In 2004, the city approved the construction of 25,000 housing units in New York, more than any year since 1972. Also, last year, the New York City Development Corporation, Housing Development Corporation, was the principal housing lender in the United States with more than $1.1 billion in mortgages. So you are the money person for New York City housing.
Yes, that's correct. That's exactly what HDC does.
Okay, let's go through some of these alphabet agencies, because there's HPD, HDC, and NYCHA, and many more. But let's look at these 3 principal agencies. HPD.
HPD is the Housing Preservation and Development Agency. It is a city agency. It is responsible for giving out the tax credits associated with building affordable housing. It handles all the heat complaints, the 311, if there's a building complaint that goes to them, and it oversees a large portfolio of housing. The Public Housing Authority is NYCHA, NYCHA, and they do public housing.
And we're talking about 400,000 plus
yes,
people.
They have 180,000 units, and I think, a population of 500,000.
And we'll be talking about a new initiative shortly with NYCHA and your agency.
And the Housing Development Corporation is really interesting. It is a public benefit corporation that was established by the New York State Legislature. It is not a city agency or a state agency. On the board, it is primarily mayoral representatives, but we have 2 gubernatorial appointees as well. HDC gets no tax levy from the city, the state, or the feds. So we function, in fact, very much like a private small mortgage bank. We have about $5 billion in mortgages outstanding and about $4 billion in bonds outstanding.
Who do you report to in city government or state government? Tell me how this functions.
We have a board of directors. The chairman of the board is Sean Donovan, who is the Commissioner of Housing Preservation and Development. On the board is also Mark Page, who's the OMB director, Martha Stark, Commissioner of Finance. Peter Madonia, who is the Chief of Staff to the Mayor. The two gubernatorial appointees are Mike Kelly and Charles Moodler, who's a partner at Strzok. And Harry Gould is a gubernatorial appointee.
Okay, so how do you make policy? How is policy made at HDC? And then how do you carry it out?
We have a mission, and the mission is to create and preserve affordable housing. It's been exceedingly clearly defined by Mayor Bloomberg, who came out with a plan, as I'm sure you know, the new housing marketplace plan.
Which came out in December 2002, which is
That's
really
right.
the mayor's housing plan and the first major housing development plan, at least since the Koch administration.
Absolutely, and it's really a spectacular plan. The plan is to create 65,000 units and preserve 28,000. HDC is responsible for 17,000 of those units.
So you're directly responsible for a significant portion of the mayor's new plan.
That's correct. And so far, we just completed calendar year 2004, and we have over 8,000 units. So we're well ahead of schedule. And
this is a 5-year plan, so you're only a year or so into it, and you've got almost half your assigned quota.
So we're
Do you
doing
build
a great
more
job.
that you were suggested to build?
Well, if we can, we'll be very happy to, and that's the goal. But we're trying to get the money out the door because the housing is needed. And as I'm sure you know, when you're talking about new construction, we announce a project, and it means that the bonds are being sold and construction will start. But from the beginning to the end, it's usually a 2-year process, just as any construction.
So we're talking about a pipeline with housing. So when it is time consuming because it has to go through this type pipeline. I use the phrase in my opening of the term crisis, and this word has been used often to describe the housing situation in New York City. What is the housing situation in New York, and is it a crisis?
It is a crisis because New York has one of the lowest vacancy rates in the country.
We're under 3?
Under 3%. And it's very difficult to find adequate housing. The other thing is, as you mentioned, so many people spend 50% or more of their income. And the guideline for affordable housing is that you're spending 30% of your income for housing. So to build affordable housing is something that is critical so people can stay in the city. The housing that we build specifically, our target market is everywhere from 25,000 to 125,000 for a family of 4. So we cover a wide spectrum. The majority of people who are in the buildings that we have financed make about 106 of the average median income for a family of 4, which translates to about $66,000. So $66,000 are good, hardworking, middle-class New Yorkers. And they're having a very difficult time finding affordable units in New York City. We want them to stay in New York City. We want them to move to New York City. These are the firemen, the teachers, the clerks, who work in Wall Street firms. People who work in retail stores,
And you provide them with mortgages, or do you provide the developer? Explain how the money flows.
HDC only does multifamily by statute. So we sell bonds, either tax exempt or taxable. And in addition to those bonds, then from our corporate reserves, which have been built up over the years, we make an additional second mortgage at the rate of 1%. So when you combine the 1% mortgage with the taxable or tax-exempt first mortgage we're raising, you're writing down the real cost substantially. If the first mortgage is at 6% and you add a 1%, then the real cost is like 4%.
Now, are these mortgages made to individuals, or the mortgages made available through the developers? Explain it to somebody who really doesn't understand this.
The mortgages are made to the developers to build the building in exchange for all of this money. And in addition to that, real estate tax abatements, they get an abatement by virtue of doing a deal with us. They don't have to pay New York City mortgage recording tax, which is a used savings. they sign a regulatory agreement saying that they, depending on which program they use, will keep the units affordable on very specific requirements. We have a compliance unit and a marketing unit. We check all of the people who rent the apartments as far as their income. We verify. There's a lottery system.
So you do all of that?
Yes. We check the developer who does it.
Okay.
We're like the eyes and ears beyond. And then we service those mortgages. Just like you have an individual mortgage, somebody services it, we service it. And make sure that the payments are made on time, the water and electricity bills are paid, et cetera.
Okay. I mentioned it again in my intro that you folks lent $1.1 billion in 2004, and you are recognized as the largest lender for affordable housing in the United States.
Yes.
Has that always been the case with HDC?
No, it hasn't always been the case. HDC had been very active, and then it slowed down for quite a number of years. But the mayor's plan is get out there and build housing, and so the $1.1 billion is a combination of tax-exempt and taxable bonds. Those were the bonds we issued. That doesn't count the individual mortgages that we put in, the 1% mortgages for the development. By doing that, we preserved and, pledged funds to build new housing. And it really, I believe part of it really is because we were incredibly creative last year. And I really pushed everyone on staff to work and get unusual new deals done.
One of the interesting statistics in terms of the housing starts and the permits that are being issued is that these permits are in the other boroughs. Manhattan, I think, ranked 4th out of those permits, and Queens and Brooklyn, my borough, Queens, getting much more of the housing starts, clearly given the need for it in the other boroughs as well. You mentioned some, in terms of your history of the market, that there was a slowdown in terms of what the agency did. Let's reconstruct that, because you are turning around an agency that had been troubled. It was led by Russell Harding. Russell has been arrested. There have been numerous charges, both of agency violations, public violations, etc. And it's a well-known fact that the agency, in a sense, felt itself under siege, and employees felt themselves under siege, demoralized. I've even heard the word tyrannized used. And now the environment is totally different. Can you talk about what you faced when you walked in November of 2003 and what the situation is now?
The first thing I'd like to say about it is that even though the corporation was under attack at that point in time, and there wasn't a real permanent leader in place since Russell left until I was selected to take over the helm, the staff did an incredible job of keeping the place together, of protecting the assets, because we do have a fiduciary responsibility. We are a finance agency. We have bondholders out there that hold, $4 billion plus of bonds that have HDC's name on it. We have to watch our portfolio, both the assets and investments, exceedingly, carefully, like any good bank would do.
Right.
And this staff, all the people there, the 125 people, did a great job of doing that. When Russell was there,
in difficult situations,
exceedingly difficult situations. My understanding from speaking with staff is that when Russell was there was no guidance from him whatsoever.
Lock himself in his office and look at computers.
And apparently it was a very large office.
Right.
And
what he was looking at wasn't particularly appropriate either. Go ahead.
Yes, so I've heard. So when he left, then the Department of Investigation and Attorney General obviously went through HDC with a fine-tooth comb. The staff was under a lot of stress. The person who was in charge, even though most of them avoided at all costs, had caused them personally now to be under the microscope. That none of those other people were indicted, I think, is a very clear indication that they were all doing their jobs and, sticking to what they were supposed to do. But obviously, when you're in a situation like that, it really does demoralize you. So coming in, there were a number of things that I felt had to be fixed. Apparently, before I took the position, there was not a credit committee at HDC. They were making all of these loans, and the decision was left in the hands of 2 or 3 people. So now...
You found that odd, I would presume, giving you a financial background.
Yes, exceedingly odd. So I hired a chief credit officer. There's 3 people in a credit department. Every project goes through a feasibility test with a credit committee and then a final sign-off. There wasn't a problem projects meeting, which is an early way you can catch projects that are beginning to have financial or structural problems. So we have one of those set up. We now monitor the letters of credit and investment agreements in our portfolio. What are the banks? What are their ratings? What
Which
percentage?
didn't happen before?
Didn't happen before. I mean, the 1 or 2 people in charge of things knew, but there wasn't a transparency.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to do. There weren't credit manuals written, there weren't underwriting manuals, so we've been working on all of that. And it's important because if everybody disappears tomorrow, anyone would be able to walk in and see what has happened and what's in the portfolio.
How much more do you have to go to make the agency what you would want it to be?
I think we are very, very close to having it be there. We're doing a massive retooling of the MIS system.
Management Information System.
And that was a very expensive system that Russell took on, Oracle system, but it was never integrated. So I got there and it was impossible to find out, okay, how many loans do we have? It would take people a week to find out. It wasn't the staff's fault.
Right.
It was not the integration.
Sort of the nightmare vision of city government.
Yes. So things are so much improved. It's a great staff. I have a new senior management staff, a new chief of staff, CFO, general counsel, head of development. Everybody's doing a great job, chief credit officer, and everyone's working together. I really believe that people are very happy now and can see that they're appreciated and what they're doing really matters.
Well, that seems to be the word out there. Let's go back to this housing boom that we talked about earlier. Why do we have this boom in construction and approvals? What are some of the underlying elements? You mentioned the mayor's housing initiative, which is, city policy clearly having an input into this. What else is going on?
Excuse me. The mayor's plan to push the housing is obviously very important. And then on the good side, sometimes you're a victim of your own success. New York, after 9/11, people thought everyone would leave. But now people have moved back. The city is stronger than ever. There is great demand. More and more immigrants keep coming into the city.
Right.
So you have all those things that are pushing the need for housing. One of the biggest obstacles is the cost of the land. This is the real problem. I'm sure you know that, I think it was under Koch where in-rem housing started.
Right.
And there were 100,000 properties, I believe.
Which the city took over because of non-payment of taxes.
Right. And then the city, through HPD, sold those off, some in the beginning for a very nominal fee. But they had to have affordable housing built on them. That's been very helpful. The last few years, the city's been going through those properties en masse. Now there's about 2,500 pieces left. That's an issue because the cost of land now anywhere in the city is sky high. That makes it very difficult for developers to build affordable housing.
And that's where you come in. How do you... But they're interested. Clearly the private sector, the private market is interested in doing this. How do you facilitate that?
We facilitate it by coming up with different programs where we think that we are providing enough enhancements and enticements to get developers who build affordable housing to participate. Right. So recently we announced a big co-op program.
Talk about it.
The co-op program is a program we were having a difficult time doing co-ops because they're very expensive. And they're expensive because developers do a co-op and they want to get all their profit out when they sell the unit, understandably.
Right.
So, and to do that would take more than the normal subsidies we give, and we give a lot in subsidies on a per unit basis.
So the market is active, but still the private market is unwilling or unable, both, to provide this without substantial assistance from you.
Well, you need to, or else they could not offer the units at the rents and at the prices that we require.
Okay.
That's really
Okay.
it.
Another thing that seemed to have struck me is that this development is taking place in neighborhoods which 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, certainly 12, 15 years ago, were no man's land.
Right.
And what you're seeing is incredible pressure on land in areas that were not safe, but they are newly safe neighborhoods. How much of the boom has to do with just feelings of safety? And is my perception correct that a lot of this is happening in areas where it wouldn't have happened 5, 8 years ago?
Oh, I think it is absolutely correct. If you look at some neighborhoods, for instance, West 148th Street, in Harlem, in the Triangle District, it is a complete change. We have photos of some of those blocks pre and post the housing. And I really believe housing is the motivating factor. What usually happens is we see a progression. Initially, maybe they will be a lower income project. Then they'll be one of our low income projects. From there, you'll see a moderate income. Then you'll begin to see some co-ops.
So there's a clear development pattern here.
There's a clear development pattern. And then after those happen, then you'll see the market rate condos coming in. And as the buildings come in, the retailers come back, the nice retailers,
Right.
because they say there is a demand, and that stabilizes the neighborhood. And I believe strongly it also really introduces a true integrated neighborhood across the economic spectrum, which I think is critical to stabilization.
And so you're part of establishing, if you will, these tipping points at various stages in this development. Let's talk, I'm sorry, I interrupted you earlier about the co-op program, and talk about some of the other programs you're involved in, the $2 billion NYCHA program. Let's talk about the Mo Vaughn project in the Bronx. Let's toot your horn.
Okay. Well, the co-op program is exciting because we went to a number of our banks and we said, work with us to come up with a program that works. Bank of America did come up and came through. It is a finance program that's a forward bond purchase, but the main thing is we can do it. It is a very cost-effective way for the developers to get involved with the program.
And they're willing to do that, and they're producing the co-ops, and a certain number of them are within the range of people like
Absolutely.
me.
Yeah. People make a lot less than you do, I'm sure. We just announced recently, the mayor announced we're making a big initiative for refi and rehabbing 202 programs. That's elderly housing.
Right.
And there are, at least that we're aware of, who could be eligible, over 100 properties with 9,000 units across the city. There are even more, but that's the first batch we believe that we'll be able to do. This preserves and rehabs elderly housing.
Where do you get the bucks for that?
We sell bonds.
Okay.
That's really the thing. We sell bonds, and in those projects we sell bonds, and they get new tax investors.
How else do you get money? Do you charge fees to the developers, and this goes into some kind of kitty?
Yes. What we do is, for private developers, we charge 1 point up front. Nonprofits, 75 basis points, and for like NYCHA, which is public housing, 0.5 point.
Okay.
We take those fees and we reinvest it by offering the 1% mortgages.
Okay. Talk about this $2 billion NYCHA. The mayor was extraordinarily happy about this. You could just see it when he announced it, and that's been part of his, his campaign so far, as centered on housing.
Well, housing is critical, as you know, from all the statistics.
Right.
HUD has allowed public housing authorities to do this. Every year they get an amount from HUD for capital improvements. So what HUD has allowed them to do is to say, okay, you can sell more now, get the money today, a piece of it, and then going forward, the first money that comes in will pay off those bonds.
Okay.
And so it helps them leverage up and be able to do the repairs sooner, which is very important than doing dribble and drabbing over the years.
Also, the corporation has done substantial work on homeownership. Can you talk about those kind of programs?
Well, our homeownership is really the co-op program.
Okay.
We're not permitted by statute to do single-family homes or condos.
Okay. Whose purview is that in city government? Is there an agency that deals with that?
To do home ownership?
Yeah.
In what way do you mean?
In other words, would HPD, who builds single-family homes in New York City? The private market does it without assistance from government generally?
HPD has some programs for that, and then the biggest assistance with that is giving people low-cost mortgages, and that is by the state of New York mortgage agency Sonny Mae.
Okay. Liberty bonds.
Yes.
Downtown, you've just succeeded in having some of these units converted into affordable housing units.
Yeah, we were very excited with that. You know, the purpose of Liberty bonds in the beginning was, you know, to bring downtown up from literally the ashes. I live in Battery Park City, and I have since 1986, and I can attest to a massive, you know, fleeing of residents down there. So the early Liberty bonds was, you know, given enticement so people would build or rehab buildings down there to get residents back in the neighborhood. And it worked. It worked so well, in fact, that the market downtown from a residential vantage point is really booming.
Right, and it seems to be not only booming, but self-sufficient and fueling itself, accelerating.
Yes, I think that's true. So from the beginning, because part of the Liberty Bond federal legislation was there was no requirement for any affordable housing, we set up our own synthetic 80-20 where we charge 3 points to the developers. We take those funds and then put that in. And then now, on this last project, 15 Williams Street, we went to the developer and said, you know, we think you can also put in some affordable units on the site. And they could do 15%. So it's a landmark. So we're getting the 3 points in addition to the 15% of the units on site that are affordable.
Last 30 seconds, what's coming up? What can we expect? What is our next press release that will announce some major initiative on your part?
Well, we are always looking for new initiatives. I think that the one thing people will say about HDC in the last year is that we are innovative and on the cutting edge. We did a military housing deal in Fort Hamilton. We came up with a huge program to preserve Mitchell-Ama housing. We're doing the 202 elderly. We're doing the NYCHA deal. These are all things that are not normal for housing agencies across the country.
Are you surprising yourself?
I'm very happy. I think the biggest reason that this can happen is that the mayor really treats his corporations, agencies, and wants them to think outside of the box and be entrepreneurial. And my background is no politics, all finance, and so it's been wonderful.
Change.
It's been a wonderful situation to be able to use all that skill to create these things.
And this interview has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.